If you're a founder trying to raise capital, you want three things to get funding. You want to get into enough meetings with the right investors, positioning yourself and your opportunity so investors see you as their top priority investment, and a process that gets you multiple term sheets without wasting months on the wrong activities. Most founders never get this because 99% of fundraising advice is built around just wing it. Build a pitch deck, send some cold emails, and hope your passion shines through. But the problem is that you're going against hundreds of founders at a time, speaking to the same investors who can only make a very few amount of investments. So the ones who are systemized in their fundraising efforts will almost always get funding instead of you. Now, I know this because I've helped founders raise over $250 million using a systematic approach of how they fundraise. And I've been on both sides of the table. As a founder who raised $16 million, and also as a tier one VC at a company called Octopus Ventures, where I invested over $200 million. So I can see exactly what separates founders who waste months chasing the wrong investors with the wrong message, wasting all of their activities on the wrong things, from those who close oversubscribed rounds with multiple term sheets and actually have the money that they need to build their vision. And it's this exact system I've built that enabled Marco here to raise $2.2 million implementing this exact system. Or maybe Chris, who raised $4.3 million. Or Yuji here, who raised for his funding round. Really what this is this is a repeatable process that you'll use for every single funding round you ever do. So in this video, I'm going to show you everything inside that system. But first, you need to understand why most fundraising advice is actually poison so that you don't make the same mistakes and don't waste time on a failed fundraise. Here's what most experts will tell you. You should just grind it out. Build a deck, make all the docs that you need. All then you need to do is you send some cold emails and then, that's it, we're done. Investors will see your brilliance and then the money will follow. But the thing is, fundraising doesn't reward a lack of preparation. And winging it is the fastest way to waste months in your funding round and just come up empty and never be able to actually raise for your startup. Because talent without discipline collapses under pressure. And fundraising is fundamentally a pressure environment. Think about it like this. It's like stepping into a championship match with no training program, no coach, and no actual game plan of what you're meant to do. You may get lucky once, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to get outclassed by the other people competing who do have a training program, a coach, a game plan. And it's exactly the same with fundraising. You're going to be outclassed by the founders who've prepared systematically for their fundraise and are actually making investors love them, whereas you're just sitting there hoping for the best. And the thing that really costs you, while you're burning through your runway, sending cold emails, your competitors are closing rounds. While you're perfecting slide 47 of your pitch deck, thinking that's going to get you investment, you're 3 months closer to shutting down. Whilst you're taking random meetings with the wrong investors, the right ones are writing checks to founders who approach them systematically. I've genuinely seen brilliant founders with game-changing companies shut down, not because their business failed, but because their fundraise failed. They ran out of time, they ran out of money, and they ran out of hope. All because they followed advice built for the amateurs and not actually for the competitive environment of fundraising that you're in. So of course it hasn't worked for you. Not when you're competing with hundreds of other founders for each investor's time and attention. You're not failing necessarily. It's just that the playbook you've been handed is built for founders who don't realize they're in a competition where only the most prepared win. And this is what took me from 2 failed businesses because I couldn't raise capital to raising $16 million across multiple rounds in my 3rd startup. All because I implemented 3 pillars of fundraising in the right manner. So when I started my first company, I looked like most founders trying to raise capital. I was trying everything under the sun. Cold emails, LinkedIn messages, you name it. But I didn't meet a single investor who was genuinely interested. That's the first obstacle. You can't raise capital when you can't even get in front of the right people. No matter how brilliant your idea was, if you can't meet a single investor, no one's going to be able to see and want to invest into you. And because I couldn't raise the funding I needed, I ended up actually shutting down that business. It was horrible. So then I started my second business, and I thought I'd learn from my mistakes. I was trying to build warm connections, but I didn't have a systemized way of doing it. I'd done it too late, and I was approaching it completely sporadically. And in the end, I only ever met 5 investors, which still wasn't enough. Because I couldn't raise funding again, I also failed that second business, right? I had 2 businesses that I failed purely because I didn't know how to meet investors. And I truly thought I couldn't raise ever, purely because I didn't have an investor network, purely because I thought I couldn't get into investor meetings. I started to learn more and more, and from these failures, really started to understand, how do you actually meet investors? And it wasn't until my 3rd startup that I really built out a systemized process for how to find and meet the right investors. In the end, we were able to meet hundreds of investors because we built our network over a longer period of time with a proven system that allowed us to get the necessary introductions to meet enough investors. So every time we did a funding round, we could meet a high volume of investors who already loved what we were doing and actually wanted to invest in us. And that's why we raised so much and were so successful, purely because we'd actually solved the major part of the funding round, which is, how do we find and meet investors? Now, once we have that, that's great and all, but what about when you actually jump into meetings? And this is where I see a lot of experts do things wrong, in that they just teach you how to create documents, or maybe even find and meet investors. But what happens when you get into a meeting? How do you actually do that? And this is what took Keith, for example, from getting, let me know about your next round, your 2 early rejections, to landing a £1.7 million round. So you're probably thinking, as soon as I get into investor meetings, investors will love what I'm doing. I just need to get in front of them and show my passion. If that was true, Keith wouldn't have been getting the same responses from every investor. Why doesn't Google just do this? Come back when you have more traction. Let me know about your next round. You're too early. You've probably heard so many of these things. The problem is, once you start talking as a founder, investors often shut off and lose interest because they're confused and don't understand the future you're painting. You're so ingrained in your business that you talk at your own level when investors don't have nearly the level of context and knowledge about your industry as you do. You're working on it every single day and they're not. So you need to actually do preparation and get crystal clear on how you communicate, build influence, and talk to them. Then you need to actually iterate and practice in the right way. So when you jump into meetings with investors, you're in the best position and doing everything correctly. So when I started working with Keith, he looked like a lot of founders who could get meetings but couldn't convert them, and was really starting to fail the fundraise. He had a solid business and was passionate about his vision, but investors just kept giving him the same polite brush-ups, meeting after meeting. And that's the thing. You can't convince sophisticated investors when they're shutting off halfway through your pitch because you're confusing them instead of inspiring them. So we got to work. And with a week of following my system, Keith uncovered the number one problem stopping him from ever getting term sheets. And that was that his communication was aimed at explaining his product's technical brilliance. When investors needed to understand the market opportunity and why he was the founder to capture it in simple and compelling terms. And that's exactly what the second step is. It's all about how we build a narrative that allows you to communicate with investors. Not only that, but also how he had to practice and iterate and work on how he talked about his business way before the actual meeting so that he's in his best position. So he made the tough call based on our guidance to completely restructure how he communicated following my system. He got crystal clear on his messaging, learned how to build influence in meetings, and then we put him through a rigorous practice and iteration process so he could perfect how he talked in meetings and communicated with investors to make them feel like he was the best founder that they've seen in the last 6 to 12 months. But look, it didn't go necessarily as expected. We didn't see immediate results for a while. And that's the thing, this isn't magic. You don't change how you communicate and suddenly have investors suddenly throwing money at you. When you're rebuilding your entire approach to investor conversations, which you need to do, you need to actually have that ability to do that because you're just not going to fundraise otherwise. You need to practice new frameworks, test different messaging, and iterate until your communication is bulletproof. That is the only way you can actually build a message and a communication and a pitching style that investors love, because there's no other way to do it. And coming back to Keith, he had incredible dedication. And about 90 days later, he raised a £1.7 million round, transforming from someone getting polite rejections to investors who were really excited to back him. And that brings us to the final thing that you need to raise capital. And this is what took Vishal from a chaotic, sporadic fundraise to a structured process that raised over £4 million for his startup. So you're probably thinking, I'll never understand the steps it takes to fundraise correctly. I don't know what I'm wasting time on versus what really matters or how to conduct myself as I go through a funding round. But if that was true, Vishal wouldn't have gone from feeling like his fundraiser was completely out of control to closing an oversubscribed £4 million round in a matter of months. And the problem is that most founders don't actually have a systematic process for how to prepare, launch, and manage their fundraising the right way. So you end up taking random meetings as they come, not creating any urgency and momentum, and not really understanding which bottlenecks you have and areas that you need to work on the most that are going to give you the biggest benefit. For example, like spending too much time on your pitch deck. You need a proven process that tells you exactly what to do and when, how to create FOMO among investors, and how to operationally manage your fundraise so every action compounds towards getting multiple term sheets. And that's exactly what step 3 is. So when I started working with Vishal, for example, he looked like a lot of founders who had done fundraisers before, but felt like they did everything wrong and it felt chaotic and they just got through it. He'd raised a pre-seed round previously, but he just felt like he wasted loads of time. He didn't really build FOMO momentum, didn't drive people towards creating a competitive round because he just didn't know what to do at each step. So he wanted a step-by-step process of what to do and how to do it to get more term sheets. From the prep phase to the operational execution to the actual closing. And that's the thing. You can't raise capital efficiently when you're operating without a process, no matter how good your business or your network is. So we got to work. And within a week of following my system, Vishal uncovered the number one problem stopping him from ever getting the competitive round he wanted. And that was that he was treating fundraising like a series of individual conversations instead of a coordinated campaign designed to create momentum and urgency among investors, and how we can actually connect all the dots to create that urgency. So he learned how to prepare properly, then launched the raise with impact, and how to manage the entire process to create competition among investors. So when you're building systematic momentum, you need to coordinate timing, manage multiple conversations strategically, and maintain discipline until the process creates the urgency you need. And in the prep phase, really understand month by month what you need to do so you know you're working on this exact thing I need to work on and this is why. And Vishal had incredible focus, and within 60 days, he transformed his chaotic approach into a well-oiled machine that generated term sheets and closed his £4 million round. So he went from going from feeling overwhelmed to being in complete control of his raise. And Eldin had raised 3.15 million doing this. Sana raised 500k euros doing this. Daniel raised 4.5 million euros following the same system. Felipe raised $6.8 million using this exact same system. So the thing you need if you want to make fundraising work for you without wasting months figuring it out on your own is to solve all of these problems systematically. And once you've established that, you need the frameworks that address each pillar and work in unison to create your own fundraising success. Because if you try and do this alone, how will you map your network systematically to uncover the hundreds of potential connections? How will you practice and iterate your narrative with feedback from someone who's been on both sides of the table like myself? How will you know which activities are moving you towards term sheets versus which ones are wasting precious time and runway from building your business? You can't. So you end up just guessing with the hope that volume will fix all your problems and you just need more people to speak to, even though you're constantly getting rejected. And that brings us on to the 3 frameworks you need to raise capital successfully. And they are insanely systematic because this is the only way that you can actually build out fundraising in the right manner. Now, the first framework is what I call the AIR system for building your network. So the big problem is you can't get enough meetings with investors, and we need to have an ability of where we can actually connect and get to at least 100 plus warm intros, which then relates to around at least 50 meetings with investors. And how we do this is what I call the AIR framework. So the first thing we need to do is we need to assemble. We need to get you super organized in how you actually build and structure your CRM so that you're targeting the right people, you're connecting to the right people, and you're keeping yourselves accountable and organized. The second thing we want to do is then we want to move into intros. And how we think about this is we want to actually then have a systemized process of how we understand what network you have, how do we improve the network, and how do we then map everything together to get enough introductions as possible so that you can actually meet a high amount of investors through a great network. And then the last one, which is run, which is how do we actually keep yourself accountable to execute at the right steps at the right time. We need to understand what that looks like. And if we do that in the right manner, that's the way in which we can actually get a high amount of warm introductions connected to some cold outreach that's going to get you to at least 40 to 50 meetings with investors. And that's the minimum that we need to be at. Now, the second framework is for narrative building. And this is the big part of you don't have a story and you don't have an ability to convince investors that you're great. And we need to convert them, right? We need to craft and tell a narrative that makes investors say yes to you. This solves the problem of not knowing what to say and how to position yourself as the obvious choice. And we think of it in three different ways. And I call it the 3 I's flywheel. And it's insight is the first one. We need to get clarity on what actually makes you great and investable. So we have to build out your founder origin story. We need to build out your unique insights. We need to build out your vision story. We need to understand the stories in which you're going to be telling. We need to understand which parts of your business actually makes investors love what you're doing. And that's where most founders stop. And that's why most founders fail to fundraise. Because the next thing we need to do is we need to start building an influence. What do we actually do from a communication point of view, from how do we answer investor questions to how do we build storytelling and communication and tone into your investor meetings that makes investors love what you're doing? And the third one, which is the most important one, what I call iterate, which is how do we actually practice and iterate in the right manner before your fundraise so that you understand what's working, what isn't, test the market in the right way. And then the third framework is that systematic process approach. We need to understand the bottlenecks, the operational launch and management, and really the accountability on what you're doing, because this solves that problem of not knowing what steps to take and when, and making sure you're doing the necessary work to be successful. We have that through 3 different sections. The first one is milestones. We need to understand which milestones matter to you right now and understanding the bottlenecks. What are the biggest things specific to you that you need to focus on? Because everyone's going to have different things they need to work on in their fundraise that means more to them. So we need to understand that. The second one is accountability. Making sure that we actually have accountability of what you're doing and when you're doing it. So you're executing on the right things at the right time and not wasting months on end on things that aren't going to actually change your fundraise for you and are going to waste a lot of time and potentially cause you to fail to fundraise. And that last one is a pipeline of understanding from an execution point of view. What does a pipeline look like? How do we launch in the right way? How do we complete a round? What does the operational execution look like so that you can close? You can run a systemized process that actually gets you term sheets. So the majority of founders don't realize their existing approach to networking, narrative, and process are completely misaligned, meaning they can never successfully raise capital. I think of this in 3 different phases of how we can make sure that you fundraise in the right way and then implement this process in the best light, give you the highest chance of success at fundraising. So the first phase of my system is the most important because it's about getting you clarity on what bottlenecks are currently holding you back and what you need to focus on and why. When we know that, we can then create an operational roadmap for the next 2 to 3 months, when to launch, how to launch, and the week-by-week steps so you know exactly what to focus on month by month, specifically to you. Then the second phase is where we actually implement the system I've just shown you. You'll get all of the proven frameworks, the AIR system, the 3 I's, the systematic process approach that have already helped founders raise over $250 million so that you can implement those things and those parts and those exercises in a much structured way. But it doesn't just give you the frameworks. It ensures you implement them correctly with structured training modules that are optimized for cognitive load, meaning you should get to the end of them and want to watch another one and not shudder in fear that there's still 45 minutes left. We want to just make sure everything's super clear that you have it and you actually do the work. These aren't boring 2-hour monologues They're short, focused lessons from network mapping to investor psychology to systematic process and management. We then need to actually have ongoing support and accountability. You're not going to be able to fundraise if you don't have that ongoing support from my end. So you get direct access to me through 24/7 WhatsApp support, because fundraising is so nuanced and so many unexpected things can happen. You need someone there to help you along the way, right away at that time. You can ask me any question. I'm there for whatever you need it on any single part of the fundraise, and knowledgeable on what you need to work on the most. And along with that, you'll get weekly office hours where you can jump in and ask me any questions directly, so that you can always have an ability to either ask me via message, via face-to-face, and we can really get down to the details. And you also get access to our custom-built AI tools that help you map your network faster, practice your narrative, and simulate investor conversations, which has been the biggest game changer for my clients, so that you're prepared for anything that comes up in real meetings. And then another way actually looks at every single one of your recordings and says what you're doing right or wrong. Now, what is your return on investment by taking this program then? Well, if you were looking at a success fee based investment banker or fundraising consultant, and let's say it was a £2 million round, they'd ask for 3 to 5% of the successful raise. That's £60,000 to £100,000 just for that round, only for that fundraise that you'd be losing by raising, that you could spend on building the product, hiring more people, getting more sales, more ads, whatever it is. I don't ask for success fees, so you'll never get a bill from me based on how much you raise, because it just fundamentally doesn't work in this industry. But for my very reasonable investment, which I'll share with you on our strategy call, I'll offer you a system that's a fraction of the price, not even 5,000 USD. And it's not just for this fundraise. You're going to have this for the rest of your life. It's for every single fundraise you do, whether you're raising 500K to $1 million, to 10 million, to 20 million. You'll be doing the exact same things, because I've seen it work across everything up to Series B. And it's only improving as we go forward, as we get updated, and you're going to get every single update for the future. Another great example was Daniel Flynn. He raised 4.5 million euros following this exact system. And you can see it's not just about finding some generic advice on Google. It's very specific guidance that I've learned from my experience on both sides of the table that you can leverage and use throughout your whole funding round. And look, this program is so effective, I stand behind it with a 90-day money-back guarantee. So if you apply the tools, the frameworks, and the strategies outlined in this program and use the system for 90 days, I'll offer you a full refund, no questions asked, and we have a genuinely a 98% satisfaction. Now, to ensure that we can maintain quality service and support at a world-class level, we can only accept a very limited number of founders each month. And I just want to say, this isn't fake scarcity that I'm trying to build. I simply can't service more than a small group of new founders every month without dropping the quality of support that I give you. Whether that's the 24/7 WhatsApp access, the weekly office hours, the personalized guidance, I can't take more than a few founders at a time, because I need to make sure that every single one of you has as much guidance as possible. And I simply will not allow that to happen, because if it does, I won't get results like Mehek's $300,000 raise, or Derek's $2 million raise, or John's $11.4 million raise. And that's what grows my program, but most importantly, your success. So as soon as spaces are gone for the month, that's it. If you're a founder looking to raise pre-seed to Series A funding, and you want a systematic approach that gets you in front of the right investors, the right message, and the right process, and if you're willing to commit to implementing the frameworks and can commit to at least 3 months following my system, then we can help you. And in 3 to 6 months from now, you could have money in the bank from a successful funding round, just like Keith with his £1.7 million, or Vishal with his £4 million, or Daniel with his raise. But let's be honest, this just sounds like typical fundraising talk, doesn't it? It's going to be systematic. It's going to get you results. So let me give you the harsh reality of how following my system works and what all of my successful founders went through to get results, because I don't want to lie to you. The first few weeks, this is going to feel slower than you'd expect. It's going to take more preparation time, and it's going to suddenly feel like everything is harder, because you're going to have to relearn everything you thought you knew about fundraising and the steps it takes to actually get the funding that you need. You're also going to start to spot massive gaps in your approach that you didn't know existed, and it's not going to be a 5-minute task to fix them. And you're going to have to really think deeply both about you as a founder, about the business you're building, about your vision, about the future, your insights, to really build a successful funding round. And it's why you need to expect to go backwards, to be frank, before you go forwards. Because we have to build your foundations, we need to understand your bottlenecks, we need to fix the old mistakes, and then level you up to get the results that you need to get funding. But then your systematic approach will kick in when those foundations are in place. And you'll have more meetings lined up, investors who understand and love what you're building, and a process that creates competition for your round. So no, you don't have enough time to wing your fundraise while you're building your business. Because all that's going to happen is you're just going to fail to fundraise, and you're not going to be able to either get the people that you need to compete with your competitors who are fundraising, or, God forbid it doesn't happen, fail to fundraise and then have to shut down your business. We don't want either of those. But as you learn, implement, and repeat, this is when the game-changing results and efficiencies pick up. And more importantly, how you can effectively fundraise for your startup and feel confident that you can raise the money you need to actually build the vision that you wanted. So apply now, and let's build you a fundraising system that not only gets you money in your bank for this round, but becomes your competitive advantage for every single fundraise you'll ever do, whether it's a pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, Series D, whatever it is. It's about mastering the skill that will fuel your entire fundraising journey and entrepreneurial journey to be able to build that massive vision that you really wanted to do. And if you're still on the fence, just check out the results from founders who have raised over $250 million below using this exact approach.